Kamano ni sweatito ni sandewe snate jabreto Sago An Snijo Sago An Snijo.
Hello and welcome to the Remembering and Reenchanting podcast. I'm so delighted today to be joined by Hilary Giovale. Hilary, thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Sarah. I'm really excited to visit with you today.
Yeah, we get to visit together. It's so
Yeah.
lovely. And and this question, how do we let ourselves visit? It's such a question of how do we let ourselves relate to each other, right? To really let ourselves sink into that space of visitation and welcoming and blessing and relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I first learned about you and your work through the Decolonizing Wealth community. And later there were like all these other threads linking us, including our mutual involvement in the Decolonial Dame writing group, and which is so much fun. So grateful. So shout out to all the folks who are part of that. And we have many like interweaving connections and people. And you recently wrote this book called Becoming a Good Relative, Calling White Settlers Towards Truth, Healing, and Repair. And you're and that's kind of one of the things that prompted this particular like conversation, this recorded conversation. And of course, it's not just about the book, it's about this much bigger. The book and us are both about a much bigger thing. And one of the things that's so exciting to me is like that there's just so many ways in which our work is so similar, and resonates so much. And so it's quite special to be able to share and visit with someone else who is on, in many ways, a very similar journey, in other ways, a very different journey, obviously, as we all are. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I love visiting with kindred spirits who are involved in this work because I find that we all have a little bit different spin on it, a little bit different way of approaching it. And then that is so necessary because we need different styles, different ways, different words, different methodologies, because this has to spread out and grow amongst our people, all of our people. And we need different ways for it to appeal and resonate with people. Yeah. So I'm grateful for the work you do too, because yeah, we are all working in our own ways to shift the culture, and that's so necessary. So thank you.
yeah. So this, just before this call, we were talking about the web. We were talking about the Orlog. And I'm actually wondering, it keeps coming up in quite a number of my conversations. I actually thought, let's start with the web.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, can you, let's start with what is the Orlog? Let's start with that. And how do we understand this interconnected web that we are a part of?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. My understanding of Orlog is very kindergarten level. And I have been learning about it from an elder named Sarah Axtell, who works with the Healing Roots community in Minneapolis, or actually in St. Paul, I think. And so they offer these wonderful study groups that are online for people of Nordic Germanic descent. And so I have been trying to learn about Orlog for probably a couple years. And just recently, it's started to land in my consciousness in a different way. And the way I'm understanding it right now is that this is a concept from ancient Nordic and Germanic cosmology, which is part of my ancestry on my mother's side. And it's the idea that, first of all, that time is nonlinear. Time moves in spirals and circles and waves and different patterns like that. And that everything that we experience presently in this lifetime is laid upon a foundation of what came before. And so, you know, in Western culture, we like to think of ourselves as individuals, right? We like to think of ourselves as these autonomous beings that are just making our own decisions. But with Orlog, you start to realize that no, actually, we are so deeply tied in the past, and the past is shaping the present as well as the future. And so, I'm operating within an Orlog that contains all these threads from all of my ancestors throughout time and space. One thing I've been thinking about is how fortunes rise and fall within Orlog. So my ancestors immigrated to Turtle Island as refugees, as impoverished people who had been disenfranchised and kicked off their land. And then they came over here and they began taking part and shaping the Orlog in such a way that their fortunes began to rise as they began receiving land grants, as they began enslaving people and using that stolen labor and those stolen lives to enrich themselves. And now, 9 generations after they first arrived here from Scotland, on my father's side, they came from Scotland, we have reached a pinnacle of fortune where the fortunes have risen to a point. And it's hard to explain for me, but it's something that just turns over and over in my mind about how the past is shaping the present and how what I do in my lifetime, the relationships I have, the work I do, the prayers that I make in my lifetime will shape the Orlog for the future as well. And so that's why one of the reasons it feels important to me to do this work of decolonization and reparations, because even though, especially at this political moment, it feels like you're just, you know, it's just going into a void. I mean, it's just, what good is it doing, right? But I do believe it's doing good because of the concept of Orlog. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes I think of Orlog as that deep web of interconnection, and its centers and it's being woven and rewoven and shifted and changing all the time by
Right.
those 3 sisters, the Norn sisters, the past, the present, the becoming,
Right.
the what has been, what can be.
Mm-hmm.
And then those dynamics of time, those alive dynamics of time, like they're sitting underneath the great Yogurthisal, the tree of life. The well of memory feeds the tree of life. And what's in that well? Do we dare look into that well of memory to understand how life itself is being shaped and changing, and what are the leaves of the tree? And I feel like much of this work of remembering and re-enchanting and this work of repair is gathering around that well of memory without getting lost in it, without getting stuck in the past. But how do we drink from that well? And what's in it?
Right. Right. Well, I know one teaching I recently heard from Elder Sarah was that it's through our spoken intentions, the oaths that we make, the commitments that we say out loud, and the commitments that are witnessed by community, that those those words, those oaths, those prayers, those intentions go into that well that's at the base of the tree, and they become part of the tree. And so it's there's that too, of the power of intention. Because when we look into the memory of the well, like you mentioned, there's so much pain. Right. There is so much pain. I mean, throughout the world over eons, there has been so much war. There's been so much patriarchy. There's been so much religious oppression, so much hunger, so much disease, so much death. And that's there, and that's true. And also there's the power that we have to dream healing, dream reconnection, dream peace. And so it's all in there. You know, it's all in there together.
The waters remember and the waters birth new life, both.
Mm-hmm.
When you speak of the dream, as I was thinking about your journey as you describe it in the book, which is very much a labyrinth. It's very much a web. The book itself is a web. And first of all, congratulations on figuring out how to write a web. I think it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult, and because you're writing, your storytelling through a linear process. A book is a linear process, and you're roughly using your own personal journey, and the insights you get during your personal journey, and as you go through, you're showing both the shift from the kind of normal Hilary, the normal person, whoever that person was, into who you became. And that shift includes shifting your ways of knowing and being. And as you shifted your ways of knowing and being, your actions, including your philanthropy and the myriad of ways in which you're conducting and living your life, shift and change as you go through this process. But it's, as you say in the book, you describe it as like it's very much a labyrinth. You keep going back and forth and back and forth. It's a very nonlinear thing. And so I think any of us who are writing about our journeys in this spiritual decolonial journey, it's always a weaving, it's always a web, and it's always a back and forth, and it's always nonlinear. And so every attempt to write that can be hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really impressed that you had, over 60 people, mostly many of your BIPOC and Indigenous friends and colleagues, and people who you've worked very closely with over many years, look at the book and offer feedback, and really offering it to your BIPOC colleagues to say, look, is this what needs to be said? And that's also to really write and work from a space of the collective, when is actually very much your story.
Right.
This is not a collective treatise or right. This is not a collective publication in any way, shape, or form, but to really kind of be handing over your own narrative to others, to help to receive that feedback, and to include diverse perspectives in how you tell your own story that's going to be under your own name, is tricky. I can only imagine how many editions you had to go through.
Yes.
And it's just so tender and so so I guess it's so hard not to, I see you walking this balance of trying to both be in humility and relationship to your Indigenous and BIPOC colleagues and elders, and not be in a space of appropriation, and not try to take too much and make sure you're doing your own work. You're not asking more of them than is appropriate.
Right.
I also acknowledge how that balance is hard, knowing is, and like the number of conversations you must have had. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know. I first, just as from one writer to another, I just feel like I want to acknowledge the like the work that it takes. And I know that this took you many years to even get it to publication.
Yeah, it did. It did. Yeah. And it's funny, you know, I was impatient along the way and I would think, okay, now it's ready, you know, and then someone else would chime in or something else would be revealed. And I would think, oh no, I have a complete blind spot here. It is not ready. And this has to be rewritten again, you know? And it was very humbling. It's very hard to ask for feedback on writing, especially when it's so personal. But I am just forever grateful that so many people were willing to help in that way, because the thing is like, when you come from this background of the fortunes that have been rising because of the stolen land, because of the colonialism, because of the slavery, etc., you you have a lot of blind spots. There are a lot of things that you just cannot see. And that has been true for me, and it continues to be true, that you know, I really have to be diligent about asking, how is this landing? Is this what is being asked for? Am I missing the mark here? And I've had to apologize sometimes because, you know, I have missed the mark. I have made mistakes. And all of that is so valuable to learning the path, learning and developing the path forward that's different, that is shifting the orlog, you know? So yeah, I'm very grateful for everyone who helped, and I learned something so important from each one of them.
Mm. Yeah. And you know, you're constantly referencing and giving attribution and trying to lift up many, many, many people's work as you go through this, which I really appreciated. And to kind of keep pointing to the many people who have informed your journey. I appreciated that. I think it's important when people, like, when we write and read and tell our stories, like, how are we incorporating, like, when I do work on origin stories, it's like, it's not just the story of where you come from. It's the story of all the people around you who made where you come from possible.
Mm.
And that made the journey of where you come from part of who you are today, right? Like, it's that, it's broadening. I think of it as, I call it the dragonfly perspective. It's broadening our perspective to include not just a tiny, tiny notion of who we are, but something that's more accurate. And you title this book "Becoming a Good Relative," and that title made sense to me at the very end of the book. I'm like, oh, okay. And like, I think in some ways you didn't know that that was a journey you needed to go on. And in my read of this is that there was a series of kind of opening things. It wasn't just any one thing. It was a series of experiences and interactions and exposures to different cultures. There's some time in the Congo that was really critical. Like that, you kind of chart a series of different experiences and dreams that you had, and then that invites you in to go much deeper into what becomes a 4-year journey of contemplation. And I'm just wondering if you can, and as you do so, as you go into that journey, you enter into different ways of knowing. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that shift. What was it like? And this was a gradual process and happened all at once. But what was it like to really begin to trust very, very different ways of knowing than when you started?
Yeah. Wow. What a good question. Yeah. You know, I was brought up in an evangelical Christian family, And, my father was a professor, and my family valued education and, intellectual thought and logic and all of that. And so I was really acculturated into that Western mind as a child, and then continuing into adulthood. And I think that's a common experience for a lot of us, especially if we haven't been exposed to other ways. It's when we're part of white culture and white identity, it's very easy for that to just be reinforced all the time. And that's the way that many of us just perceive reality. And that's how it was for me. It started to shift around the time I turned 40, which was 10 years ago. And I suddenly began building relationships with Indigenous peoples. Like you mentioned, I took a trip to Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. I began visiting ancestral lands, and things started to happen. And some of the Indigenous teachers and mentors that I had, I was hearing them say things, no matter which culture they came from, whether it was, a Dene person or a Hopi person or a Lakota person, they were saying things to me that were the same across the board. Like, listen to your heart. You can trust your intuition. You can use your dreams as an important source of information to inform your life. Dreams are a spiritual communication. Dreams are not just like mental chatter, which is what I thought before. Dreams can also be a sacred communication. And that was fascinating to me, that these cultures across, such different geographies, all had this essence that they were sharing with me. And I really began to trust it. And at that time also, I started to have dreams. I started to have intuitive nudges. I started to have things happen that were just crazy synchronicities. Like one, I remember, really, I was still in my 30s at this time. I was at the library one day, and I was walking through the shelves, and I literally felt like someone had taken my head in their hands and turned my head, and my eyes went straight to this book series that is by Elizabeth Cunningham, and it's called the Magdalene series. And it's fiction, but it is drawing on all of, what's known about Celtic people in what is today considered the British Isles. And it's, I want to say, 3 or 4 part series. And I had never had any interest in that, any inclination toward that, but my gaze fixed on those books, and I thought, okay, I have to check them all out. And I went home and started reading them, and it started doing something to me to read about these archetypes and about these myths and about these characters in history. And so I basically just began a process of allowing things like that, allowing and being curious. And it often felt like, like the old fairy tales where, the breadcrumbs are dropped through the forest to lead you on your way. And you don't really know where you're going, but you just follow the breadcrumbs. And it felt like that. And then it was rewarding too, because magical things would happen all the time. People would show up, images would show up, symbols would show up, books, you name it, relationships. So it really became a source of joy and curiosity for me to start exploring that way of being.
Uh-huh. Do you have a name for that way of being, just for yourself in your own head?
Sometimes I think of it as like intuitive ways of knowing. Or yeah, that's probably the most succinct way I could describe it. Mhm.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things I love about the Orlog is it helps to give some framework for it. It's like you're touching the waters, you're touching the waters of reality, and the web is shifting to support you.
Right.
Like the web is responding to how you're engaging with it, and it's like bringing things to you. I always like it's bringing things to you, and it is. I mean, I think it's probably one of the older ways of understanding magic is the way our internal and external world like intersect and have these synchronicities.
I love that image. Like, yeah, touching the water and then the web responds. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel it. I feel it when you're speaking it and writing.
Mhm.
And it's fantastical, right? And I mean that in the best way possible.
Right. Right.
Um, and when we touch those waters, if you touch them with reality next besides you, which I have to say, I don't think everyone does touch the waters with reality sitting next to them. I think you can touch them without reality, which leads you down different pathways. But if you touch that web sitting side by side, the reality of pain and suffering, you see the horrors. See the horrors. If you can like kind of, what was it like? Because you were just beginning to trust your intuitive sense, as I understand your story. You're just beginning to have more trust in this when you learned um, that there were many people within your own family, your own ancestors here on this continent, the United States, had enslaved people from Africa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you didn't know that growing up. It was something you had not been taught.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and you were just beginning, you're like, oh, just as your own intuition is kind of awakening in this lovely way, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
there's this like, oh.
Right. Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, this ugliness about the reality of your ancestral line. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you can kind of talk us through what was that experience like?
You're making me realize that was a tremendous gift that those two things happen in tandem. Because one of the things about touching the reality of that pain that we see throughout our families, our communities, our country of white America is that we all know that reality is there. We all know it. And yet we do not, by and large, we do not have the capacity to really look at it squarely. We have developed an entire system of deflection and defense mechanisms to avoid looking at it and dealing with it and talking about it, right? And that's being extra reinforced right now. And I think the way that happened, the synchronicity of my intuition coming online, my dream world coming online, just as I discovered this information. And also, another really important thing was the teaching of spending time on the land, praying on the land, building a relationship with the land, giving back to the land with offerings, asking the land for help. That was another piece of it. And so the fact that those things all came into my awareness around the same time helped me cope with the pain of the reality. And, I remember when I first learned that information about my ancestors enslaving people and also receiving grants of stolen land. It was a very snowy winter here that year. I live in northern Arizona at high elevation, and sometimes we have winters with a lot of snow. And that winter was extremely snowy. And I would put my snow pants on and my snow coat and my mittens and my hat, and I would go lie in the snow and wail. And these tears were just pouring into the snow because that was the intuitive instruction I received, was like, it's been too long now. It's been too many generations of turning the blind eye, of not looking at this, of not talking about it. And now it has to move all the way through. And it was the land holding me silently the way she does, with so much love, with unconditional love, like mother to child, that allowed that material to finally move through. And I couldn't have done it by myself. It's too much for any human to contemplate that reality, you know, but she helped me. So, and then I also asked, I began tending an ancestor altar, and I began connecting with the very old ancestors, the ones who lived long before this pattern of war and colonialism and patriarchy became predominant, and asking them for help, and they helped me too. And so there were many forms of help that came, and we need that. We need that to look at this very difficult reality.
We needed to look at this reality, and we also need it because engaging with those other ways of knowing, and with working with ancestors and working with the land directly, is such a key part of the process of moving into something different.
Right. Yep.
Like we need it as a collective. We need to engage with that. Yeah, it's so beautiful. And so you started going on regular fasts, vision fasts, which was, I love how you describe how much you didn't want to do it. And how much you didn't want to be uncomfortable, and you didn't want to leave your bed and your hot shower, and you had like zero interest in like just getting uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And how important being uncomfortable was, and how important, and how later, much later, after doing this for some time, you did have moments when you could just be at a very fancy hotel or something and have all the pretty sheets all nicely washed for you, and you really saw like, oh, it's the sustenance is just not the same.
Right. That's right. Yeah. It's quite a paradox to go through a fasting ceremony like that without food and water, lying in the dirt for days on end, and all alone, no tent, nothing over me, nothing, just completely, out there, just exposed to the elements and everything, the heat, the flies, the discomfort, the fear, the loneliness. The worst part of it is like facing your own mind, and all the stories that your mind tries to manufacture to torment you, and all of that. And to finally realize, oh, that this is actually a form of nourishment, that everything in my conditioning is telling me that something is wrong here, and that this is crazy, and this is a stupid idea, and this is dangerous. And at the same time, it's doing something to me that's really important, and it's rewiring my mind. And it's those 4 fasting ceremonies I did. It's funny because sometimes they come back to me and it is so visceral. Like I can smell the way the plant smelled, and feel the soil, and it's like imprinted in my DNA now, because it was such an intense experience. And I find that I can recall that very easily and summon that, and draw on the lessons that were given during those very extreme days.
As you were talking, it reminded me of this quote that you have from Yellowbird's book which is for Indigenous minds only, and he talks about decolonization and how neuroscience research shows that deep reflective prayer and sacred ceremonies and practices are just a few in a long list of practices that can create positive changes in our brain. The goal of decolonization is to delete old, ineffective brain networks to support destructive thoughts, feelings, memories, and behaviors, not only those that occur for most people, but also those that are intimately connected to the past and contemporary oppressions associated with colonialism.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. His work is so profound. And actually, because his book has that title, For Indigenous Minds Only, I wasn't sure if I should read it or quote it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
And I reached out to him, and he was so kind to respond and read an excerpt. And he gave permission for me to cite that work, which was very humbling and moving to me, because his work is geared toward, the healing and the liberation of Indigenous people. And here I am applying it to a white settler, right? But the fact that he had the generosity and the grace to allow that says so much to me about the wisdom of those cultures, that they can hold even someone of my lineage as in that circle with them. That's incredible grace and extraordinary generosity.
And you asked.
Right. Yeah.
And if you hadn't asked, I don't know what he would have said yes, right?
Right. I don't know.
Like it's not to be assumed that he would say yes.
Absolutely not. I mean,
Right.
I was ready to pull out that part of the book if he said no, or if he didn't respond, which also would have been an answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It absolutely would have been an answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And I feel like that's the kind of care, like just like the care of asking and the willingness to do different based on the response.
Right.
And that requires a lot of trusting in yourself too, right? Like it's okay if you take it out. Something else will show up, and there's other
Right.
things to say, and like the world is big, and it's okay to go slowly and to keep asking.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, it's essential, really.
And through that asking, you've done so many rituals, which was really cool to read about. And that included this particularly, like there's one ritual that really just, several of them, but that just jumped out in terms of what does it mean to, when you were instructed by some of the ancestors of some of the people who were in your interpretation of some of the people who were enslaved by your family, to do a ritual honoring the people who your family had enslaved, and to do it with 3 generations, with your parents, with your own generation, and with your children.
Yeah.
And to really look at, and just like, if you can say, if there's something about that you don't have to say everything as you do describe it in the book, but if there's anything in that you want to just share for people listening.
Yeah, that was that happened shortly after we had visited some of the ancestral land in Louisiana that my father's family lived on. And the previous generations lived in Mississippi, which is where the family enslaved people. Then I believe the 1860s, they moved to Louisiana. And that's where, even still, there's still family members there. And so I think there was something about that action of visiting the land, putting offerings of Mississippi water down on the gravestones, visiting the Whitney Plantation Museum, and getting a sense of what those institutions of slavery were like, actually walking through the cabins where people lived and seeing their names on the memorial and all the things. There was something about that that did something to my psyche. And I received a visitation soon after that with some of the descendants of the people my family had enslaved, asking for this ritual. And so we carried it out. And that was a real test for me because, you know, that could be kind of a nutty request to make, to explain, you know, I received a spiritual visitation from people who are no longer alive. And this is what they asked for. And my family was so, you know, patient with me and willing to try it out. And we did it. We did everything that was requested. And the end result was that there was a healing that came for us, because the thing is that institution of slavery that was so dehumanizing, that was so based on greed and profiting off of human life, it hurt those who perpetrated it too. We're all in a circle of mutuality, right? And so you can't do something like that to somebody without losing a piece of your humanity. And I really feel that, especially because that was done in my family, and then it was, you know, passed down with silence and with denial. I was carrying a piece of that wounding, because I really believe that these ancestral events that have happened, sometimes they get passed down for many, many generations before the family is finally ready and is finally feels safe enough and finally has the capacity to unpack it and look at it. And that is what has happened in my generation. I am the one who has the conditions to be able to finally look at this. And so, you know, that was such a shock. Again, like, how could it be that these spirits would be so generous in helping us recover, right? but I really believe that's what happened. And then as part of that process, I also asked them to help guide us in making reparations. And I did receive help. I've received so much help and so much guidance on how to do that. And it's really become a way of life for me. I just live every day there are reparations going on as part of my daily life. And that is real healing. You know, that's where the healing comes from, those of us who descend from these enslaving families. Our healing comes through reparations.
Can you give some examples of what that kind of material reparations looks like for you and your family today?
Yeah. You know, it happens on all different kinds of levels. It happens, for example, by, you know, making monthly recurring donations to Black and Indigenous-led organizations. It happens through building relationships with people who are parts of those communities and listening to them and believing what they say, even if it contradicts my own life experience or what I'm experiencing on a daily basis. I need to listen to them and I need to believe what they are saying to me. It takes the form of, you know, reaching out to organizations in my community and saying, how, if at all, can I help? And then moving in response to what I hear. So maybe it's taking notes for the meeting. Maybe it's cooking food. Maybe it's washing the pots. But whatever it is, I try to be available for that as much as I can. In my case, also, not from my own family of origin, but from my husband's family, I'm able to practice philanthropy. So it involves returning resources, returning philanthropic financial resources to communities from which that wealth has been extracted. How do people with wealth, where did that wealth come from, right? It came from the earth, and it came from communities that supported the building of this economy since the beginning. You know, it came from stolen land, it came from stolen labor. And so once I became fully aware and accepting of that very difficult reality, it became very easy to return resources as reparations.
You point out in your book, and Edgar's work with Decolonizing Wealth also talks about this. These days, 0.04% of philanthropic dollars goes to Indigenous communities, which is, just less than 1%, which is an incredibly small amount. And only 8 to 9% of philanthropic grants go to BIPOC-led initiatives. Key piece being BIPOC-led initiatives. Many grants are given to initiatives that supposedly support BIPOC communities, but are not led by them. And that is another way of dominant culture maintaining control, right? It's like and so like you also talk about the importance of thinking about shifting decision-making power and participatory grant making. As examples from flow funding and RSF in Mississippi. But the point of participatory grant making is to help shift is so that the people who are impacted by the problems and impacted by the historical injustice are deciding where the grants are going, not simply the people who have the money.
Exactly.
And I'm just like, if there's something in your experience that you just want to highlight from like really shifting who's making decisions about where philanthropic dollars are going. Because I do think that's actually one of the key pieces of changing philanthropy is changing decision-making processes.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's one I could lift up, which is called Magnolia Mothers Trust, and it's run by an organization called Springboard to Opportunities in Jackson, Mississippi. And I'm a donor to that program, and what they do is that they have a whole very highly developed, complex system of listening to residents in their community. Many of them are, Black mothers who are experiencing poverty and living way below the poverty line. And it's not because there's anything wrong with them. It's because poverty has been imposed on them by the history of this country and by the current reality of this country. It's being enforced even more right now. And so in the process of listening to their community, they realized that what was being asked for was guaranteed income by these women who are raising their children below the poverty line. And so that's one of the things that they do is they give guaranteed income. I believe it's $12,000 a year per family. And it completely changes their experience of life to have a little bit of extra cash that they get to allocate. They get to decide what that's used for. And there's no outside interference saying this is a worthy expense and this is not, or whatever. And so that's one program I could lift up. And another one that I'm also involved with is a flow fund that is, managed by Indigenous women. Same thing, where the donors give the money, and then the Indigenous flow funders are totally in charge of deciding where that goes because they have their boots on the ground. They understand the dynamics and the needs within Indigenous communities far better than I do. And so they make all the decisions. And, there's something I find sometimes that in philanthropic spaces, we kind of have this narrative about, we need to make sure that we're having an impact. We need to measure and, quantify what is happening as a result of these donations that we're giving, right? But it's possible to let go of that and just trust and say, these communities know what they need much better than I do. And so I'm just going to let go of that. And when I started doing that as a philanthropist, it was very liberating for me. I needed to not be trying to control that because I don't know. And so there's a gift that comes with learning to trust and letting go of control and power.
It's a huge gift of learning to let go of power. It's a huge relief. I mean, do you experience when you started that, because I know it's for many philanthropists, making that shift is hard. Like they don't want to make that shift. They don't want to let go of power. I know that you do 90% of your philanthropy is to BIPOC-led communities. Was the shift of releasing some of that decision making, was that a hard shift for you to make, or did that just like easy, kind of a no-brainer?
You know, the only reason it was hard is because I had a whole system of myths living in my psyche. You know what I mean? I had a whole structure built up in my mind. And once that structure became visible, it became visible to me through things like this. I remember one day, a good friend of mine who's a Dene man, he visited Chief Seattle Club up in Seattle, and he sent me some signage that they had talking about land tax and about, rent is due for you settlers. You settlers, your rent is due, so please sign up and start paying your monthly rent that you need to pay in order to live on our land, right? So he sent me some graphics, and I looked at them, and I had this huge reaction inside, like, what? How could rent be due for me? And I got so triggered by it, right? And so by that time I knew, I had learned that if I get triggered, it's time to like go, okay, I'm gonna sit with this. I'm just gonna sit with this and explore it, and I'm not gonna react. I'm not gonna open my mouth and start arguing. I'm gonna sit with this reaction I'm having. And very quickly, sitting with that reaction taught me, oh my gosh, there's a whole system of entitlement that I have somehow absorbed by osmosis, you know, from living in this culture. And I have absorbed this entitlement to land and to resources. And so I began unpacking my entitlement and realized, wow, this is just founded in a bunch of myths that I must have heard as a child. And it's probably also founded in the ancestral fears that my people experienced from being disenfranchised and kicked off their land in Scotland and Ireland. And so understanding all of that and like dismantling the story inside my own mind is what allowed it to become an easy transition. As soon as I did that, it was super easy, and it's been easy ever since.
And you had the practice before that happened. Like you had your ancestor altar, you had your
Right.
practice of sitting with your ancestor altar, you had your practice of going to the sacred mountain, you had your practice of being adored by the ponderosa pines, you had your practice of sitting with Indigenous elders of from various places near where you live and in relationship to the land that you're on today, not just somewhere else.
Yep.
So you actually had a lot of practices. So by the time that landed with you, you actually had a way of processing it. And what I see so many philanthropists and others not have is not having practices through which they can engage with the discomfort when it arises, because it is going to arise.
Right. That's true. That's a very good point. There had been years of foundation laid by that time. And I had also had years of practice of sitting in Indigenous community-led spaces. And so those things together, I helped develop that capacity to not react. And, even though I was having the internal reaction, I didn't externalize it.
And not just to not say something stupid in the moment, but
Right.
to sit with it and to say, oh, okay, how can I participate?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, no, I just had that experience too with something that I got to ask of something that made me uncomfortable. And I knew as soon as I felt the discomfort, some part of me was like, oh shit, I'm going to have to do it. Like,
Right. Yep. Yep.
like that particular discomfort is actually my sign that,
Yeah.
and not to say that every time we feel uncomfortable, we should, sometimes we have to listen to our discomfort and not act, but that discernment of like that particular kind of discomfort, which is like, oh, that's my privilege. That's
Right.
my like conditioning from dominant culture. That's the thing I want to like, let me just like look at it for a moment and see what I can do.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be uncomfortable. But
Mm-hmm.
again, it's like, what is the uncomfort that enables us the bigger thing that we're looking for?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Discomfort is a huge gift. It's a huge teacher on this path.
So how do you know when you've given enough? And is there
Mm.
such a thing as giving enough?
Yeah. It's interesting because I have had, like, when the book was in production, I had all of a sudden a number of very difficult things come into my life that I had not had to deal with before. There was death, there was loss, there was illness, there were all kinds of challenges that all just piled up at once. And that was an interesting thing to experience because suddenly I didn't have the capacity to do what I had been doing for a decade. And and I really had to, it was like life and death. It was like, now you have to focus on you, which was actually a lot harder for me. And so there's a teaching in that too, that there are seasons of life that all of us go through at one time or another where we have to step back and rely on, in my case, I was able to rely on the goodwill that had been built over many years, and people understood where I was coming from. They weren't saying to me, "Oh gosh, here's another white lady who's just, all talk and no action." They were they were compassionate and they understood and they showed up for me too. And so I think it's a constant dance. It's a constant renegotiation and a balancing act to know when you've given enough and when you are doing enough. But I think the way I discern it is like, I've just really come to trust myself. And even though I never wanted to turn that kind of attention to my own care and well-being, I had to. I was forced to. And so that's been a teaching too.
And I know I'm just, and this question of like, also, when I think about enoughness, I think about not just our own selves, but the circles that we're in and the ways in which we can influence other people in the circles that we're in. And like, so it's been so many times, I'm sure you've come across this when I've seen folks like do, and I can pick on philanthropists, but it's really not about philanthropists who will uh, like do some of the emotional and spiritual work, and do some of the work of learning some of the history or learning some of the like things that people are experiencing today in BIPOC and Indigenous communities. Um, and they'll have like a heart opening moment, and the money doesn't necessarily flow, or people don't do reparations and things don't happen. The material conditions don't change. They don't stop requiring the ridiculous amount of monitoring and evaluation reporting that so many philanthropists require. as just the simplest thing, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think there's so many other ways of thinking about evaluations, and that's a kind of a different conversation, which I have with people sometimes. Um, but like how do you how do you engage with your peers and other people in your social network to support them and not and kind of doing the both and do the spiritual work and do the material work, do the reparations and challenge yourself to give more for land tax and engage with your own healing and look into your own ancestry and look into where your people come from and connect with the earth and connect with the trees, but don't only connect with the trees and not look at the material conditions
Right.
of the people who are here.
Yeah, totally.
How do you encourage folks?
Earlier this year, I was very, honored to be invited to teach 2 philanthropy classes. One was through Bioneers Learning. One was through Decolonizing Wealth Project and their donor community, which is called Liberated Capital.
Which I am part of and I highly recommend to people.
Yes, I highly recommend it too. I love Liberated Capital, and just all the programming they do is so, so wonderful. And it was really interesting to teach those classes because we were part of a community setting where we were doing a lot of sharing with each other. We listened to guest speakers. We started unpacking some of this stuff together, and it taught me so much because I realized that many of us in philanthropy who are inclined toward this style of philanthropy, which I think of as reparative philanthropy, many of us are isolated. We are often the only one in our family or our institution who is willing to go there. And people are kind of looking at us askance and saying that we're being unrealistic. And sometimes we're getting active pushback and we're being actively, held at bay, kind of, or ostracized a little bit. And so we tend to be very isolated. And what I saw in those classes is that people are hungry for connection, hungry for community. We need to be witnessed by each other. We need to hear each other's stories, and we really need to support each other, because although we tend to be isolated within our own families or communities or institutions, still there's a network of us all around the world that is growing, and we need to find that network and plug in with each other, because that is our peer group. That's our community. So that's one thing that I've really seen the benefit of that. And then another thing is that for me personally, I am part of a couple of small groups of people who are practicing philanthropy, many of which are doing reparative philanthropy in different forms. And we have meetings every month or every other month, just in a small group, kind of peer support group. And for me personally, that is a lot more effective than, going to a big conference or taking a big training or something like that. It's much more helpful to have this kind of intimate relational sharing around the issues that we face and really supporting each other, in a small cluster of folks. Because it's heart work, it's spirit work. It's not just intellectual work. You can go and listen to lectures and read books all day long, but at the end of the day, you really need kin to do this, And so those are some of the things that have been really helpful for me.
Again, becoming a good relative to your fellow philanthropists.
And after a while, you hear the same things over and over, and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm not alone at all.
And are you able to encourage family foundations to shift their investments so their investments reflect their values as well as their philanthropy?
You know, I have not done that work personally, but I know that this is a big part of the issue. And, you know, Edgar Villanueva with Decolonizing Wealth Project has a real focus on that. And I know there are many other people working in that realm as well that are doing consulting work with foundations, etc., because it really needs to change all throughout the entire system. Everything needs to change. And that's one of the huge issues. Another issue is that foundations are only required by law to give 5% every year. So that means foundations, in a lot of cases, have become vehicles for hoarding money. And we really need to be doing better with that. We need to be giving more. We need to be spending down. So,
is that part of your principle for you guys, is spending down?
Well, we are doing that as much as we can, given our current situation. Yes. Yeah. Like for example, we have a donor advised fund, which is not a foundation, but is that's a type of bank account that's used for philanthropic giving. And they have traditionally been used as like a tax shelter to just hoard resources. And we don't do that. We spend ours down every year. So, you know, things like that, just really trying to be diligent about not sitting on it, letting it flow.
Yeah. And money is meant to flow. Yeah. I've been doing more of that work with some investors recently, and it's so important. It's so important to look at once across the board what's going on with your financial flows.
Right.
So you published this book. That's ongoing. Our life keeps evolving, right? I'm just so curious, like, as we kind of bring this conversation to a close, I think it's like a question that I wanted to make sure I ask you is, like, as you're going on tour, as you're talking to different groups, what kinds of responses have you been getting? Like, how do you think the decolonial movement is growing? What are you noticing?
Wow, that's a good question. Yeah. You know, what I see happening right now is if you look at, you know, if you put your finger on the pulse of what is going on in the United States right now, people are so devastated, so sad, so baffled, so overwhelmed. We are lost. You know, we are just lost. And so I think, you know, one of the things I see happening, the book came out toward the end of 2024, and then this, you know, political situation started in early 25. And what I see happening is that I'm very grateful for the timing of when it came out, because it was born into the world at a time when it could meet this bafflement, this loss, this overwhelm, this grief that we are going through. And that's what's needed. We have to grieve what is happening. There is not a quick fix. No amount of protesting is going to fix this, although protesting is a great thing to do, but it's part of a much bigger picture. It's part of a spiritual malaise that has been going on for centuries. And so that's kind of how I see it growing right now, is that we have got to meet each other in compassion and kinship. It is not enough anymore to get up, you know, on the woke soapbox and lecture people. You know, or on the liberal soapbox and lecture people. It is so much deeper than that. And so we've got to meet people at the level of the heartbreak, at the level of the grief, at the level of the disillusionment, and then begin building together from the bottom up. So that's the way I see it moving and growing. I've had, you know, many people contact me over the months that the book has been in the world saying, I was in tears. I was on the ground. I couldn't believe that I finally heard the thing that I have been thinking, but I didn't have the words to say. So I've heard feedback like that. And I just take that as a sign of it's an answer to prayer, because the book is not, even though the book is about me, it's also not about me. It's every page of that book is laden with prayers, and my prayer in putting it out into the world was that it could help somebody and it could be of service. That's the prayer that goes along with it. And so when I receive that kind of feedback, it's not like, oh, go me. It's much more like, thank you that the prayer was answered, you know? And I hope it can continue to do that and meet the needs in that way. And also, like you mentioned, our Decolonial Dames writing group, there are so many books like this that are coming out, so many different forms of work, and all of them are needed. And I'm grateful for all of them because we need it on so many levels.
Mm-hmm. Yes. On so many levels. So I just love to end this our session together with what are you? I mean, we've been talking about this the whole time, but you to answer if you were to inquire into your heart with what you want to leave with, what are you remembering?
What am I remembering?
Yeah, there might be a song that might be appropriate or might not.
Yeah. There are a couple of songs that I would love to share through this recording. One of them is a traditional Selkie song from the Scottish Highlands. And Selkies are shape-shifting seal spirits who can turn into human beings for a while. And for me, they are a very powerful metaphor for the condition of identities that we are born into but didn't choose. So for me, I can't tell you how much I would love to opt out of the identity of whiteness, but I can't because I'm walking around in this skin. And so, the Selkie metaphor is really powerful for me because it's about the both and. And then there's another one too, a wonderful song written by Carolyn Hillyer, who lives in Dartmoor, England, and wrote a beautiful song in a pre-Celtic, proto-Celtic language that is 4,000 years old, that is being reconstructed by the University of Wales. And that is a song about memory. It's called Sago An Snijo. And so those are two recordings to share with you, because music has such power, and especially our old ancestral languages. They have they are embedded with such memory and such deep teachings. And so that has been a very rewarding path for me to explore. So we'll hopefully be able to include those.
Well, definitely be in the show notes, and we can probably put hopefully some will go in the episode itself. Yeah. Well, I want to remember and lift up the extent to which all the different things, all the different pathways you mentioned in your book, the rekindling ancestor memory, the working with dreams, the honoring of land and relating to land, actually giving offerings to land and giving offerings to ancestors, and paying attention to synchronicities, the music, the revitalization of ancient language, and particularly in music and the singing, particularly the singing. And then interweaving that with the on the ground action work, the reparations, the relationship building, the shared economies, the walking alongside and collaborating with. Those are threads, those are rememberings that I find in supporting the human earth body coming together again. And I hear them in my students, I hear them in my clients. Many of them resonate with my own journey. And just, there is a fabric here. There is a fabric and there is a pathway. And there is a spiritual pathway in this work, and that can support this work, and from which this work can keep unfolding. And so just remembering that old truth, that there is something that is still here and is still available to us, no matter our ethnic and ancestral lineages, including when we have many, many different ones that may seem to compete with each other over time. But the practice of singing is one that keeps coming.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's ancient human technology that all of our ancestors knew how to use.
Well, thank you, Hilary.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been lovely visiting with you. Thank you.
As the light fades.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ah, ah, ah.